Welcome to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws, the podcast that cuts through the rubbish to explore the world of neurodiversity. I'm your host, Nick King.
And I'm your host, Kate Fox. And together we're here to explore, understand and celebrate being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world. From ADHD and autism to dyslexia and other quirky brains, we talk about it all.
And go off on tangents. So whether you're neurodivergent, love someone who is, or you're just curious about neurodivergent minds, you are in the right place.
Let's get ready to juggle some words and maybe even a few chainsaws, metaphorically, of course. Today, we are looking at, it's another snappy title, I would say. Nick, what is our title?
Our title is Different Communication Styles Being Valid and Cultural.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
Okay. And I think...
and what do we mean?
Yes, what do we mean? Because our underlying agenda here, I think, we just lay the agenda out straight away, is to say neurodivergent communication is talked about as a deficit and wrong, and we're pointing out, actually...
that nobody's wrong and nobody's right, and everybody is actually different if we sat down and thought about it. Which we're going to do.
Yeah, we're going to do. Because I don't... Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that our equivalent podcast hosts in Japan, if that's a thing, if there's two neurodivergent people currently doing a podcast in Japan, they're not, for starters, speaking English, are they? So already language is clearly something that culturally shifts. So that's one example. Different languages are a thing.
Yeah. Also, I mean, in Japan, not that we've ever shaken hands either, because I don't like shaking hands. I'm a hugger. But like, you know, if we'd be Japan, we would have bowed. You know, I was training people in China the other week. You can't point in China. No pointing. Bad. You can't point in Disney either. Can't point in Disney.
Can't point in Disney. It's
no. So like one of my first jobs was at the Disney store, and you're not allowed to point with one finger at all. It's against the rules because so many cultures find it offensive. So you have to do like a hand open or the 2-finger point, like that way. Yeah, because so many places find it offensive.
Wow. And you also shouldn't point at a statue of Buddha, as I found out when I was going, look, at that statue of Buddha. Oh yeah, we don't point at statues of Buddha. Oh, okay. So I think the point we're making is, so it's not just about verbal communication and language. We're saying that there are different, I'm going to use the word codes now, there are different cultural codes in both different cultures, different countries, different subcultures, different classes, which would suggest there is not a universally accepted code of communication. And what we're saying, but it's really hard to make this argument actually in context, is that autistic communication, like deaf communication with a capital D,
yes,
is its own language effective. Well, I suppose we're not arguing.
BSL is actually now official language and has been for about 15 years, I think.
And that actual, that recognition was absolutely crucial in all sorts of ways, wasn't it? To understand that style of communication is not in itself a deficit. And I think Rose Ayling-Ellis, the actor who is deaf and who was on Strictly Come Dancing and won it actually, with a really, there was a powerful dance that she and
Giovanni,
yes. I didn't know whether to call him Gio, as if we had some sort of...
like as if we're mates.
Yes. They had a moment in the dance where the music stopped and we stepped into Rose's world. Well, or did we? Well, we seemed to step into her world where there was no sound to be heard. And actually, I do think I'm referring to that as a moment, because it did feel like that was a moment.
It was powerful.
Yeah. And a mainstream population went, whoa, we can step into the communication mode
of somebody
else.
Yeah. And even because it's hard to conceptualize sometimes because you are very used to how you communicate and where you live, and often you communicate with people who are very, very similar to you. And that sort of starts to feel like there are rules and there are ways to do things correctly and there are ways to do things incorrectly. But actually, our worlds can be incredibly small. I mean, even if you think, so where we are in the northeast of England, it's very usual to talk to people on public transport. I don't go on public transport, but my understanding is that it is. But then if you travel 300 miles south, that's not the case. And therefore, that it's not even an English thing.
No.
Never mind a UK thing. It's not even an English thing.
And so, if we were to talk about eye contact, which is literally in the diagnostic manuals, the eye contact that should be made is definitely always a moderate level of eye to eye looking, but not in a starey way and not in a not talking way. Are you telling me, are you saying that this is not a cultural norm everywhere in the world?
No, it's not, because there are several countries where if you make eye contact with people, they think that you're taking the power and the hierarchy within that relationship. And there are lots and lots of people who, for various reasons, should not do that. You know? So it is. And you're absolutely right. It's almost entirely a significant amount of our diagnostic criteria, yet.
So what
outside white Western culture, it doesn't hold.
So actually, I mean, that is a particularly glaring example, isn't it? The eye contact thing, and it is one of the things that people mostly, if they know one thing, they might. Autistic people don't make eye contact, or they do make eye contact, and therefore I'm not going to diagnose them. But in these other countries, what happens there then? So they're not using those diagnostic. In a way, the whole house of cards tumbles at that point, surely.
I mean, very quickly, as well, there are other countries that are still using old DSMs. I know even some European countries where once you get to 18, you can no longer be autistic and you have to pick bipolar or schizophrenia. It's no way. I was training in China the other week, and they only named sort of autism in the 1980s, which is obviously significantly, and they have some very, very different ideas about what it is to be autistic over there. They don't even have the word autism. I don't know. I don't even know how to say it. So I did some training over there, and it was just a translation issue because the rest of the text was very positive and affirming, but the word, the R word, was there, and that's how it translates.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
And yeah.
Can we unpack this more? That you were just training in China, so doing this thing. What sort of organisation or institution had?
It was a school. It was a nursery school, and randomly, because I'd ran some training at White House Farm, and it was an expat school, and the guy who ran it used to work in the nursery next to White House Farm, and then got in touch with me after he'd seen that I'd run training at White House Farm. I have a really random life sometimes.
Indeed, that is an impressively random life. And then I'm thinking of that expat school in China then. So it's the children of mainly British then and other nationalities.
A bit of both, but yeah. Some British and some Chinese.
So the ones who have an autism diagnosis that has come presumably then from their...
So they will have all, because they're quite young, they'll have all been diagnosed within like the Chinese system.
Ooh. So did you find out anything about that?
Yeah, so they are only just starting their ideas that we would call inclusion. So if you are young and you are diagnosed over there, you immediately go to a different school. Like the day you are diagnosed, you go into a different setting, which looks different, and looks possibly a lot like trying to normalize you. So they're just starting the ideas that what we would call inclusion and keeping young people in mainstream school environments. And they were like, what do you think about that? And I'm like, I'm not sure that actually worked over here, really. Not sure that old idea is any better. I don't know what the answer is. But yeah, and then, but you were talking in the last podcast about meowing in different languages and different noises. And then in some cultures, that's entirely like just a normal part of communication. Like
Meowing.
making different noises. Maybe not meowing, but like making different noises for communication. Like
absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, potentially meowing.
But I'm thinking of now, yes, there are particular African tribes, for example, where there are clicks, aren't there, in other vocalizations, throat vocalizations, and that is part of the communication.
Oh, even just different gestures. I talk in Neurobears about like how loads of people go around patting children on the head, like ruffling their hair. And in lots of sort of Western culture, that's really, really acceptable. And then other places, it's really like you don't do that at all. And it's not endearing and it's not a nice thing to do. And it is, I think it's a privilege how much I've trained internationally and that I hear different stories from different places. I always find it incredibly interesting. And I think it does just sort of back the idea that, that these social rules that we have are entirely made up, in which case they can't be right and they can't be wrong and we can't be doing them wrong. And therefore we don't need to be trained to do them right.
Why hasn't this? Because actually, the understanding that social rules and linguistic rules are constructed and arbitrary, as in there's not a set of rules that they have to be.
Yes.
Theoretically, shouldn't that entirely break down and obliterate not the idea of neurodivergence, because I think it kind of holds.
Yes, there's more, isn't there?
Yeah. And it holds that there are some people whose brains are wired, it seems, in a way that is a minority way. Yeah. And then some that are wired the predominant neurotype. It's hard not to say that that's a thing, although you can also break that down. But autism in particular, based around being diagnosed by, inability to keep up to linguistic and social codes. How is that not just broken down?
Because we didn't make the rules up.
Right. Yeah.
Because the rules that are made up, we didn't get to make them up.
We didn't. We're not in power, are we? Okay.
That's the thing. I often talk. I've got a really beautiful friend who's originally from Spain, and she's been over here forever. And I often talk about the fact that I have never learned Spanish to communicate with her. I did Spanish in school. I think I can probably remember 10 words. But I have never learned Spanish because she lives in England and she speaks English. However, if I had gone to Spain and I had met my friend in Spain, it was far more likely that I would have learned Spanish to communicate with her because I would have then been the minority within that cultural situation. So it would have been me who was expected to make that sort of 90% of the way to join the majority. And it's about privilege in the end, isn't it?
It is. And I am aware, and I don't think it is important, I think, to acknowledge we have said this before, actually.
Yeah, we have a lot of that stuff.
Cis women as well, and there is a whole kind of ethnicity issue, and then we have our varying degrees of other neurodivergent privilege. We have tons of neurodivergent privilege in all sorts of ways, don't we? But again, that would also shift contextually if we were suddenly in Finland, for example, which I think is a very, I think not everyone in Finland. It's a very autistic friendly place, is Finland. It is. I just wanted to refer to, and I'm sure you will know about this, and I apologise greatly for any mispronunciations I'm about to do. But the word that's been coined in Maori for autism is taki watanga,
Yes.
which means my, his, her own time and space.
Yeah.
And the idea that the culture recognises that perhaps someone might exist in their own time and space, and it might not be the same time and space as that of those around them.
Mm-hmm.
So progressive and wise.
And old.
And yes, an ancient idea. And mostly kind of disempowered in that there are, the massive racism that the Maori people face, having been essentially colonised. Is huge, and so I mean they don't.
And there were people sort of getting it right about how we communicate and our sensory needs and how people are different. Many years ago, and I feel like there was a significant backward step at some point.
And actually, I really like Robert Chapman's recent book, Empires of Normality. And essentially, he is an autistic philosophy professor from Durham University who argues that since the Industrial Revolution and since industrial societies anyway, required people to work and be productive in a particular way, they then had to be normalised in a particular way, and there wasn't as much space for those who need their own and do things in their own time and space. And therefore, we've kind of come even further down a social ladder. We are surplus to capitalism, but capitalism actually needs some people. I think this is quite an accurate summary of his book. Capitalism actually needs some people that it can sort of put into a dependent position and make money out of finding cures for, looking after, putting into special places. It's kind of quite profitable. And I am aware that would be really hard to hear, however, surely, if you're either a person struggling with aspects of your own neurodivergence at this moment, or a parent feeling that it is not actually neoliberal capitalism to blame for your difficulties. But
we are all judged about how much we supposedly contribute to capitalism, though, aren't we?
Yeah.
However, that's not how we should be judged.
No. I mean, I'm subtly judged, apparently, because I haven't. You've contributed much more effectively to neoliberal capitalism than me. You have produced new workers to work in it. You made new ones. That is very good. Happy with you. You've created beings.
Oh, dear.
And I have not created any being. I am literally not productive. And then I'm going to have a menopause and be even... My potential for productiveness has gone completely. I have no use whatsoever to capitalism, apart from I produce poems, which weirdly enough, not that useful.
Not that useful for capitalism.
No. And even though your beings are probably going to go off, be circus performers and things, which arguably
might not contribute that much towards capitalism
not
either.
that much, really, no. Nonetheless, by objective measures, you've done very well there. So we've digressed a little bit into a Marxist analysis of capitalism. Yes, everyone. But again, that kind of... I mean,
it's the idea of validity in society, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what does your society look like, and what does it look like to be valid within your society?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, is it a bit of a cliche to say that, for a shaman, for example, the idea of a tribal shaman, they were probably neurodivergent. And they probably were neurodivergent, your tribal shamans. And as someone said on X the other day, in fact, it was Robert Chapman, actually, who wrote Empires of Normality. He said something like, has anyone ever heard of a neurotypical witch?
No. I have that poster, the daughters of the witches that they didn't burn.
Ah, yeah.
I'm on board with that one.
Yes. And that's another very good example of the useful roles in society that neurodivergent folk, probably you can be a I mean, personally, I do quite witchy things actually, and it is a challenge to my executive function and dyspraxia. Find a spell, find a bit of string, tie some string, make a St. Bridget's cross, do what? Find some rushes and put them in this shit. Oh, it's beyond me, that. So in certain ways, a podcast about the traumas of trying to be a witch while neurodivergent. I don't think that's the...
Is that not where we're going with that?
It's not where we're going, but it's a fair point. Yeah,
but it's bringing yourself joy, isn't it, in your communication? It's about building, having, to an extent, maintaining, but I think maintenance of autistic relationships looks very different. Like, I could message somebody with a thought that I hadn't messaged in 6 months and they wouldn't think twice about that.
Well, that's these social codes, whereas actually what you should do, I presume, in that situation is preface it with, hello, I hope you are well. Think of a fact about them or their children or their dog. I hope your dog is still
alive.
Food or alive, yes. Some other things. Also, here's the thing I really wanted to say.
Yeah.
And now I've spent some time building up to that, wasting all of our time. But I've communicated with you acceptably in the social code. Yes.
Yeah, I don't send messages like that.
I mean, it's one of the very hardest things, I think, for neurodivergent people in workplaces, isn't it? In especially
the fluffy emails. If my emails are over 3 sentences long, I'm like, I feel like I might upset. Like, if that's something I say to like some of the people I work with, I'm like, if my email's over 3 sentences long, I think I might upset you with the content of the email, or might have previously upset you, and I am actually stressed. Otherwise, 3 sentences is where you got.
But it's so ingrained in it. So I've got a friend, actually. So, as many of my friends are, is in the process of realising that he's autistic and thinking about a diagnosis. And he Facebook messaged me yesterday to ask me for some can't remember what it was, but a practical piece of information. But he did preface it with, how are you? But I just discounted that as
a sentence that was there.
Exactly. And I gave him the piece of information, and I was quite busy, so I wasn't actually up for engaging in a chat, because actually he is someone where I would have liked to know, how are things going. And he responded with a thank you, and he said, are you okay? And it felt like the are you okay was, you have ignored my question about how you are, and you might not be okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, now I've got to address. And I honestly don't feel that. It's actually quite weird. The sentence, are you okay, has been asked of me 3 times in the last 2 days in very different contexts, twice by, in his case as well, fellow autistic people. And I'm like, what does that mean? The only time I think you should ask someone, are you okay, is if something has just happened.
Yes.
That you're not okay. Some scaffolding's fallen nearby.
Do you know what that'll be? It'll be because you've been busy. You told me, like, before we came on, that you've been really busy this month. And it'll be because you'll have dropped off those spheres that you're normally in their awareness of.
Yes.
Or
yes.
something.
Yes. I think
that's normally what those are you okays mean.
Yes. And actually, and even around social media use, I probably am around and people see me, but indeed I've probably done less of that. Are you okay?
Because you've been busy. When I and I think particularly when you're self-employed, often your busy period isn't the period where people understand that you're busy, because you are creating and then you present and produce. But actually, in that presenting and producing time, it's often quite quiet, and you did all the work 3 months beforehand.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I do a lot of and people are like, you're quiet, and I'm like, no, I'm just drowning. I'm over here. It's fine. Fine.
But imagine I had so I briefly had a virtual assistant who had previously worked in very corporate environments, and the agency who sent her to me sort of apologised really for her after, because she would send such long emails full of
long did not read.
apologies. Yeah, exactly. I should have just replied with that, but that would have been very unusual to her, because in the corporate environments there's a whole code of communication, and she was very embedded in that, as we are embedded in whatever the culture that we are most connected to. And we all, I think, as I say, it was autistic people asking me, "Are you okay?" And partly, anyway, yes, I would say I have a mixed communication style. As a late diagnosed adult, it's not that so here's another thing. I do not always speak neurodivergent. I speak a mixture. It's like, what is it, when they used to say Franglish? People mixing up the French and the English. Or it's almost sometimes a pidgin, because it's hybrid. Yeah. Essentially, it is hybrid. There is very encoded neurotypical ways of communicating that I have learned. And then there are autistic ones. And the autistic ones, interesting, I'm not saying ADHD in this instance particularly, the autistic ones get encouraged when I'm in our podcast
with other autistic people.
Yeah. And so they will become stronger unconsciously to some degree. And then neurotypical people will be like, what? So I
think there's a lot of joy, though, that unbridled joy that we talk about with communicating with, your fellow neurodivergent autistic people. And I think, there's a lot of people who are happy in their quiet and their solitude, and I don't think anyone should feel any kind of shame around that, or feel like they're missing out on anything, or that somebody else has something going on, because you just never really know what's happening in other people's lives. But I find a huge, huge amount of joy in communicating with other autistic people.
Me too, and relief. And I think on that note, then, we end with a bit of my poem, Autistic Joy. And you pointed out, actually, that a lot of this poem, and I hadn't realised it, is about communicating with other autistic people. So, and some of it isn't, you'll see in this extract. Some of it is. Dungarees with dogs on. Contagious excitement about the server in Pret's guinea pig dress and how it has pockets, and her guinea pigs will also recognise it on pictures of their own food, bits of cucumber and apple, a retro flavour of Snapple, an info dump about my Seaboard vacuum cleaner bought after extensive joyous research, electric blue stained glass with lights slanting through in a furniture polished scented church, a right rhyme at the right time and the unchimability of orange, spotting patterns on your bedspread in their conversation, in the icing on a Chelsea bun, a perfect pun, like my Buddhist friend who said the new COVID strain would be called Omicron.
Thanks for tuning in to Neurotypicals Don't Juggle Chainsaws. We're so glad you joined us today to explore the fascinating world of neurodivergence with your hosts, me, Nick King.
And me, Kate Fox. If our conversation sparked a thought, a question, or even a smile, don't keep it to yourself. Drop us a line at hello@neurotypicals.don't-juggle-chainsaws.co.uk or visit our website, neurotypicals.don't-juggle-chainsaws.co.uk, to write in. We'd love to hear from you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast platform.
Until next time, keep embracing the unique ways you juggle the chainsaws of life.